Hi folks, welcome back to Game Geeks. I'm your host, Kurt Wiegel. Today's episode is a drive-through RPG product. It is Marvel Heroic Roleplaying, a brand new release from Margaret Weis Productions. Now, what do we have going on here? Well, this is a supers game, as you could probably tell from the title. It is based on the Marvel Universe, which, to be honest with you, I've always kind of preferred over the DC, mainly just because I've always been more of an X-Men fan than a Justice League fan. It's a matter of personal taste, I know. Truthfully, I would go with Authority and Stormwatch if I could, but those don't seem to get as much press or play. Now, I'll start right out from the top. What's different about this game as opposed to most other supers game is this is very definitely a narrative-focused game. This isn't about who can lift more, Colossus or Thor. This is much more about your character's drives, how they operate in groups, and what their abilities are. It is much more of a, I hate to use the phrase normal, but normal game than what you would have seen in something like Smallville. Where in Smallville is something very much, it's a soap opera game. It's a game more about relationships and interactions than it is about really the cool powers that your characters might have. You could, and I've been told you could very easily use Smallville to run something like Glee if you wanted to, which I think is one of the more creative applications of that game that I've heard of in recent years. Now, the Marvel game, it is, the narrative focus is rare but not unheard of among supers. It goes back to something like Truth and Justice by Atomic Sock Monkey Games, sort of has that approach, all the way back to Hearts and Souls, which is one of the first games we reviewed here on Game Geeks. If you'd like, go to the site GameGeeksRPG.com and take a look back at our episode listing. It's way back, may still even be in the single digits, I'm not sure, but I know it's under 25. Because this is by Margaret Weis Productions, this is a Cortex-powered game. But so it is a dice pool mechanic, but as I mentioned, it's a bit gamier than something you would expect from Smallville or even Leverage. But it's still lower on that spectrum than, say, Supernatural or Battlestar Galactica would be. So the thing about how this game operates is it doesn't have your standard attributes that define your characters. One of the first types of dice that you can use in your dice pool is your affiliation. That is, does your character work well solo, as a buddy system, or on a team? For example, Wolverine operates best solo, whereas Cyclops sort of operates best as part of a team. Does that mean he can't work solo? No, but he's not anywhere near as effective. And so somewhere in the middle would be something like the Thing. Yes, he's part of a team, but he does best with small groups, like a Thing, Human Torch pair off to go do something else entirely different. So those are your affiliation, and then there are your distinctions, which are almost aspects as you would expect and see from something like Fate. Now, these can be personality types, quotes, they can be other characteristics that really aren't easily definable by any other area with your character. These are some things like lead from the front, lead by example, which is a Captain America distinction, or the smartest guy in the room, which is one for, say, Beast. This does allow for a certain amount of lack of granularity, so you could have smartest guy in the room and brilliant scientist. So you could have Beast and Tony Stark, and then you might get into an argument about who was really smarter. And to be honest with you, it doesn't really matter that much. Now, both of these that I've mentioned, the affiliations and the distinction, are based on die codes. For the affiliations, you've got a D6, a D8, or a D10. The higher your die code, the better you are in that sort of environment. Whereas the distinctions, you either have a D8, which helps you in a good way, or you can find some way to use that against yourself, roll it as a D4, and then give yourself a plot point. More on how they lower the die code could work against you, other than just the fact that you don't have a higher number, in just a second. After that come your power sets. These sort of define the powers of the game. And these can be everything from inborn superpowers like Spider-Man's wall crawling or to Wolverine's healing. A Cyclops' optical blast. What we think of as superpowers are sort of built in there as well. Different levels of durability, stamina, strength, agility, etc. Then there are the powers, teleportation, web slinging, up to, say, equipment, which is the Iron Man armor, Black Knight's sword, Captain America's shield, stuff like that. There are always limits built in with every power, too, that sort of give the GM ideas about how they can use that against you or deactivate your powers in certain situations. Specialties, these are really where your skills, your feats, your edges, whatever, are all kind of packaged into one. These are your skills and training. They're everything from, say, acrobatic combat to an expert in some field. These usually are at D8s, just to give you an idea of the kind of dice you get to use there. Finally, there are milestones that you get to pick for your character, how many XPs you get for an event, and how you advance. It is a dice pool, like I mentioned, so what it is you pick all the possible dice you can use and you roll them all at once, and then you leave that pool on the table. Because normally, you get to add the highest two. Every one you roll, the GM gets to use against you from his Doom pool, which is sort of like how he gets to fuel what's going on from his point of view. You can spend plot points to add more to your roll, but it's only from that pool that you've already rolled. You don't get to pick everything up and re-roll it again. All right. Damage is listed as stress, both physical, emotional, and mental, sort of like dealing with how damaged or mentally screwed up or psychologically damaged you are from a given event. In terms of breaking down campaign structure, it actually approaches it from the point of view of the events, which are the big, usually multiple line spanning things that happen in the Marvel Universe. Everything from Breakout to the Age of Apocalypse, the House of M, Civil War, etc. And then what it'll do is, so if you hang on with this idea of your event, that's really your campaign structure. So let's say you wanted to do Age of Apocalypse, which is one I happen to know well enough I can talk about it for a few seconds here. What you say is, all right, Charles Xavier died before he founded the X-Men. Magneto started them, and it's a post-apocalyptic, pardon the pun, setting where the mutants are trying to save the world from the bad mutants. Go. And then your characters find ways to fit into that motif. Toward the end, there's also a lot of provided characters. Some are that make a lot of sense and are obvious. A good chunk of the X-Men are in there, as well as Captain America, Black Panther, the Fantastic Four, etc. There are some that were surprising me by their presence. Armor, who's a relatively new X-Men character. There are also a few, in my opinion, notable absences, such as, say, Thor, but they include Luke Cage and Iron Fist. If there's any flaw or fault I can find with this game, it's simply that I find the rules to make your own character to be a little nebulous, and your best bet in those cases is to pick an existing character, someone you like, and that you might want to emulate, and you go from there. For example, if you want to run a completely Marine game, you could take some of the stuff from Iron Man, scale it back a little bit, and you've got Stingray. Just to pull out a complete obscure Marvel character there and throw it up against the wall for you. Again, a much more narratively focused supers role-playing game, different than what you're probably used to seeing from the super genre. I like Margaret Weis Productions. I like what they've been doing with their Cortex system. I like the fact that it's different. I like the fact that they are really sort of changing up what your role-playing games are focused on. So instead of who can punch harder or who's smarter, it's more about how you can use those in a given situation. I also like the fact that what this might do is either enhance or prevent some of the typical fanboy arguing of who's stronger, Beast or Wolverine, which really don't matter that much for a role-playing game. By the way, it's totally Beast. But that's just going to incite some rage in the comments I can see already. So either way, a very new offering from Margaret Weis Productions. This promises to be a very well-supported line. From what I can read up on it, most of the campaign structure and support is going to be based on these events and how your characters can find a role to play in those large, sort of macroscopic events that are going on in the Marvel Universe. Promises to be very well supported. It works really well if you want a slightly different focus for your role-playing game than just the usual, I hit it, it falls over, I knock it through a wall, etc. For Game Geeks, I'm your host, Kurt Wiegel. Good day and good gaming.